Daniel Carter stood in the marble foyer of the Laurent mansion, covered in dust and sweat, while the billionaire CEO stared at him with an expression he couldn't read. "I'm not asking about the light," Vanessa said quietly. "I'm asking if you're happy." The question hit harder than any overdue bill or sleepless night ever had. Because nobody, not in 7 years of single fatherhood, not once, had bothered to ask. And somehow, this ice-cold billionaire with everything money could buy was the first person who actually wanted to know the answer. If you want to see how a broken electrician and an untouchable CEO collide in ways neither of them saw coming, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Daniel Carter's alarm went off at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before it was supposed to, because the damn thing had been glitching for 2 weeks, and he hadn't found time to replace it. He slapped the phone silent and lay there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the creak of the house settling around him like old bones. 32 years old. Most mornings he felt 50. He rolled out of bed, every joint protesting, and stood barefoot on the cold floor of his bedroom. The room was small, cluttered with laundry he hadn't folded and a stack of bills on the nightstand he hadn't opened. Through the thin wall, he could hear his mother coughing in the next room. A wet, rattling sound that had been getting worse for months. He pulled on his jeans, the same pair he'd worn yesterday, and grabbed a wrinkled work shirt from the floor. It smelled like sawdust and copper wire. He'd wash it tomorrow. Maybe. Downstairs, the kitchen was a disaster. Lily's cereal bowl still sat in the sink from last night, crusty with dried milk. Her math homework was spread across the table, half finished because she'd fallen asleep before she could complete it. Daniel picked up the worksheet and stared at the multiplication problems, his daughter's messy handwriting looping across the page. He'd have to help her finish it tonight, if he got home in time. The coffee maker gurgled and spat, producing something that looked more like sludge than caffeine, but Daniel drank it anyway. He stood at the counter in the dim light of the stove hood, scrolling through his phone. 4 missed calls from his boss. 2 texts about a job that had been moved up. Another text from the electric company about the overdue payment. He closed his eyes and breathed. "Daddy?" He turned. Lily stood in the doorway, her blonde hair sticking up in every direction, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. She was wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with the stars that were getting too small for her. "Hey, baby, what are you doing up?" "I heard you. Sorry, I was trying to be quiet." She shuffled over and leaned against him, warm and small. He put his hand on her head and felt the weight of everything he was supposed to be and wasn't. "You going to work?" "Yeah." "Are you coming to my soccer game today?" Daniel's stomach dropped. He'd forgotten. Again. "What time is it?" 4 o'clock. He mentally ran through the schedule. The rewire job at the office complex was supposed to be done by 3, but these things always ran late. And if he left early, he'd lose hours he couldn't afford to lose. "I'm going to try, Lily." Her face fell, just a little, and she tried to hide it by looking down at the rabbit in her arms. "Okay." "Hey." Crouched down so they were eye to eye. "I'm going to try really hard, all right? I want to be there." "It's okay, Daddy." Grandma said she'd come. That made it worse somehow. That his 7-year-old daughter had already learned to manage her disappointment, to plan around his absence. "I'll be there," he said, even though he didn't know if it was true. She smiled, small and uncertain, and hugged him. He held her tight, smelling the strawberry shampoo in her hair, and wished he could freeze this moment and live in it forever. Before the day started pulling him in 100 directions, he didn't want to go. By the time he got her back to bed and kissed his mother's forehead, she was already awake, propped up on pillows and breathing hard. It was nearly 6. He grabbed his toolbox from the garage, threw it in the back of his truck, and pulled out of the driveway just as the sky started turning gray. The city looked different in the early morning. Quieter. Less complicated. Daniel drove through empty streets, past closed storefronts and dark houses, and let himself pretend for just a few minutes that he wasn't drowning. His phone buzzed. His boss. "Carter, where the hell are you?" "On my way." "You were supposed to be here 20 minutes ago." "Yeah, I know. I'll be there in 10. We got another job added. Emergency call. Some rich lady's got a light out in her mansion, and apparently it's the end of the world." Daniel rubbed his eyes. "Can't someone else take it?" Everyone else is booked. You're up. I've got the rewire at the... I'll send Mitchell to cover it. You're going to the Laurent estate. Daniel didn't recognize the name. Where is it? His boss gave him an address in the hills, the kind of neighborhood where the houses had gates and the driveways were longer than his street. Daniel wrote it down on a napkin from the glove box. How much is she paying? Does it matter? Just get it done and don't embarrass me. These people tip. The line went dead. Daniel sat at a red light, staring at the address, and wondered what kind of person called in an emergency for a light bulb. The Laurent estate wasn't a house. It was a compound. Daniel pulled up to a gate that looked like it belonged to a museum, black iron and gold detailing, with a call box and a camera pointed at his truck. He pressed the button and waited. Yes? The voice was clipped, professional. Not Vanessa Laurent, probably staff. I'm here to fix the light. A pause. Drive up to the main entrance. Someone will meet you. The gate swung open, smooth and silent, and Daniel drove through. The driveway was lined with trees, their branches arching overhead like a tunnel. It went on for what felt like half a mile before the house came into view. It was massive. White stone, tall windows, columns that belonged in a painting. There were fountains, actual fountains. Daniel parked his truck near the front steps, suddenly aware of how out of place it looked, rusted and dented next to the sleek black cars lined up like soldiers. He grabbed his toolbox and climbed out. A woman in a gray suit was waiting at the door. You're the electrician? Yeah, Daniel Carter. She looked him over, her expression unreadable. Follow me. Inside, the house was even more overwhelming. The foyer was bigger than his living room, with marble floors and a chandelier that probably cost more than his truck. Everything gleamed. Everything was perfect. Daniel felt like he was tracking dirt just by existing. The light is upstairs, the woman said. Ms. Laurent is in a meeting, but she asked to be notified when you arrived. I don't need to bother her, just point me to the problem. She insists, yeah. They climbed a staircase that curved like something out of a movie, and Daniel tried not to touch anything. At the top, they walked down a hallway lined with paintings, real ones, not prints, and stopped at a door. The woman knocked. Come in. The office was huge, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And sitting behind a desk that looked like it weighed more than Daniel's entire bedroom set was Vanessa Laurent. She was younger than he expected, maybe 30, with sharp features and dark hair pulled back in a way that made her look severe. She wore a black suit that probably cost more than his rent, and she was staring at a laptop screen with the kind of focus that made Daniel feel like an interruption. Ms. Laurent, the electrician is here. Vanessa looked up, and for a moment, Daniel forgot how to breathe. She wasn't beautiful in the soft, easy way. She was striking, intense, the kind of woman who looked like she could buy and sell you without blinking. Thank you, Claire. Her voice was calm, controlled. You can go. The assistant left, closing the door behind her. Vanessa stood and walked around the desk, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She stopped a few feet away and looked at Daniel like she was appraising him. You're younger than I expected. Daniel shifted his toolbox to his other hand. You're paying for the job, not my age. Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Fair enough. The light is in the library. This way. She led him out of the office and down another hallway. Daniel followed, trying not to stare at the house, at her, at the surreal fact that he was walking through a billionaire's mansion at 7 in the morning. The library was absurd. 2 stories of books, a rolling ladder, leather chairs that looked like they'd never been sat in. And in the center of the ceiling, a light fixture that had gone dark. It went out yesterday, Vanessa said. I've tried replacing the bulb. Nothing. Daniel set his toolbox down and looked up. Could be the wiring. I'll need to check the breaker and trace the circuit. How long will it take? Couple hours, maybe. Depends on what I find. She nodded. I'll be in my office if you need anything. She turned to leave, but then stopped, her hand on the doorframe. She looked back at him, and for a second, Daniel thought she was going to say something, but she just nodded again and walked away. Daniel stood there, alone in a library bigger than his entire house, and got to work. The problem wasn't the bulb. It wasn't even the fixture. It was a short in the wall, buried behind layers of plaster and wood paneling that had been there for decades. Daniel spent the next 2 hours tracing wires, testing circuits, and pulling apart sections of the wall as carefully as he could. By the time he found the damaged wire and spliced in a replacement, his hands were cramped and his back was aching. He flipped the breaker and the light came on, bright and steady. He stood there staring up at it and felt the small, ridiculous pride of fixing something that was broken. "Did you figure it out?" He turned. Vanessa was standing in the doorway watching him. "Yeah, short in the wall. Should be good now." She walked over, looking up at the light. "Thank you. Just doing my job." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Daniel felt something shift in the air. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel frowned. "Sure, sis." "Do you actually love what you do?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried to figure out what she was really asking. "I don't know," he said finally. "I'm good at it. It pays the bills. Most days that's enough." "But is it what you wanted?" Daniel laughed, but it came out bitter. "I don't think I've had the luxury of wanting anything in a long time." "What?" Seeing. Vanessa didn't respond. She just stood there, her expression unreadable, and Daniel wondered what she saw when she looked at him. A worker, a tradesman, someone who didn't belong in her world. "I should get going," he said, picking up his toolbox. "Send the bill to my boss, he'll forward it." "Wait." He stopped. Vanessa hesitated like she was deciding something. "I have other properties. Offices, residential buildings. They all need electrical work, and the company I've been using is unreliable." Daniel stared at her. "You offering me a contract? I'm offering you an opportunity. Why? Because you're honest, and because I don't think you're the kind of person who does half a job." Daniel didn't know what to say. A contract with someone like her could change everything. Steady income, real money, the kind of opportunity people like him didn't get. "I'll think about it," he said. Vanessa pulled a card from her pocket and handed it to him. Her fingers brushed his, just for a second, and Daniel felt the contact like static. "Call me when you decide." He took the card, smooth and heavy, with her name embossed in gold. Vanessa Laurent, CEO, Laurent Properties. "Thanks," he said. She smiled, small and fleeting. "Thank you for fixing the light." Daniel walked out of the library, out of the mansion, and back to his truck. He sat in the driver's seat, staring at the card, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Lily's teacher called. She forgot her lunch. Daniel closed his eyes and let his head fall back against the seat. He was supposed to be at the rewire job. He was supposed to pick up his mother's prescription. He was supposed to be at Lily's soccer game in 8 hours. And now he was supposed to decide whether to take a job from a billionaire who looked at him like he was something more than just a guy with a toolbox. He didn't know what he was doing. He never did. But he started the truck and pulled out of the driveway, the card still in his hand, and told himself he'd figure it out. He always did. Daniel stopped by Lily's school first, dropping off the lunch his mother had packed that morning. The secretary at the front desk gave him a tired smile and promised to get it to her. He wanted to see Lily, to hug her and tell her he loved her, but he was already late, and the day was slipping away from him. The rewire job was a disaster. Mitchell had shown up drunk, or hungover, or both, and half the work was done wrong. Daniel spent the rest of the morning fixing mistakes and trying not to lose his temper while his boss yelled at him over the phone. By the time he finished, it was past 3, and Lily's soccer game had already started. He drove to the field with his hands gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles went white. When he pulled into the parking lot, the game was in the second half. He could see Lily on the field, running hard, her face red and determined. He got out of the truck and walked to the bleachers where his mother was sitting with a blanket over her lap, coughing into a tissue. "You made it," she said. "Barely." They watched the game together in silence. Lily scored a goal, and Daniel cheered so loud people turned to look at him. She saw him then, standing on the sidelines, and her face lit up in a way that made every terrible moment of the day worth it. After the game, she ran over and threw her arms around him, sweaty and breathless. "You came." "Of course I came." "Did you see me score?" "I saw. You were amazing." She grinned, gap-toothed and perfect, and Daniel held her close, wishing he could protect her from every hard thing in the world. On the drive home, Lily chattered about the game, about her friend Emma who had tripped over the ball, about the pizza party the team was having next week. Daniel listened, half present, his mind still stuck on the card in his pocket. That night, after Lily was in bed and his mother was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a beer he didn't really want and stared at Vanessa Laurent's card. He thought about the mansion, the library, the way she'd looked at him like he was a person, not just a service. He thought about the bills on his nightstand, the truck that needed new brakes, the roof that was leaking in the corner of Lily's room. He thought about what his life could look like if he said yes. And then he thought about what it would cost. Because people like Vanessa Laurent didn't just hand out opportunities. There was always a price. Always something they wanted in return. Daniel finished the beer, threw the bottle in the recycling, and went to bed. But he didn't throw away the card. 3 days later, Daniel was halfway through another job, replacing outlets in a strip mall, when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Hello? Mr. Carter, it's Vanessa Laurent. Daniel straightened, suddenly aware of the grime on his hands and the sweat on his forehead, even though she couldn't see him. Miss Laurent, hi. Have you thought about my offer? He wiped his hands on his jeans. I have. And? I'm interested, but I need to know what I'm getting into. That's fair. Can you meet me tomorrow? I'd like to discuss the details. Where? My office, downtown, 10 a.m., so. Daniel thought about his schedule, about the jobs he'd have to move, the hours he'd lose. I'll be there. Good. I'll send you the address. She hung up before he could say anything else. The next morning, Daniel put on his cleanest jeans and a button-down shirt he hadn't worn in 2 years. It was wrinkled, but it was the best he had. He dropped Lily off at school, kissed her goodbye, and drove downtown to an office building that looked like it belonged in a skyline montage. The receptionist directed him to the 32nd floor. The elevator was glass, and Daniel watched the city shrink below him as he rose higher and higher, his stomach twisting. Vanessa's office was corner suite, all windows and minimalist furniture. She was standing by the glass when he walked in, looking out at the city like she owned it. Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. Call me Daniel. She turned and smiled. Vanessa. She gestured to a chair, and Daniel sat. She poured 2 cups of coffee from a carafe on her desk and handed him one. He took it, grateful for something to do with his hands. I'll be direct, she said, sitting across from him. I own 17 properties across the city, residential, commercial, mixed use. They all need electrical maintenance, upgrades, and emergency repairs. My current contractor is expensive and slow. And you think I can do better? About that. I think you can do it faster and cheaper, and I think you'll care about the quality of the work. Daniel sipped his coffee. It was good, really good. What's the pay? She slid a folder across the desk. This is the contract. Read it over. The terms are generous. Daniel opened the folder and scanned the numbers. His heart stopped. It was more money than he'd made in the last 6 months combined. This is for 1 year? He asked. Renewable depending on performance. He looked up at her. Why me? Vanessa leaned back in her chair, studying him. Because when I asked if you loved your job, you didn't lie. Most people would have. They would have said what they thought I wanted to hear. I didn't think you wanted to hear anything. Exactly. Daniel stared at the contract, at the numbers that could change his life, and tried to find the catch. What do you get out of this? He asked. A reliable contractor and maybe someone who sees me as more than a checkbook. There was something in her voice, just for a second, that sounded almost vulnerable, but it was gone before Daniel could grab onto it. I'll need to talk to my boss, he said. Figure out logistics. Of course. Take your time, but not too much time. Daniel stood, tucking the folder under his arm. Thank you for the opportunity. Vanessa stood too, and they shook hands. Her grip was firm, confident, and Daniel wondered if she could feel how nervous he was. As he walked to the elevator, she called after him. Daniel! He turned. I hope you say yes. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and left. On the drive home, Daniel's phone rang. His boss. Carter, where are you? You've got 3 jobs today. I know. I'll be there. You better be. I'm not running a charity here. Daniel hung up and stared at the folder on the passenger seat. He thought about Lily's face when he missed her games, about his mother's cough that was getting worse, about the roof that was leaking and the truck that was dying and the life that was slipping through his fingers no matter how hard he held on. And he thought about Vanessa Laurent, standing in her glass tower, asking him if he loved what he did. Maybe it was time to find out. Daniel signed the contract 3 days later, sitting in his truck outside a hardware store because he didn't want to do it at home, where Lily might ask questions he didn't have answers to yet. His hand shook as he wrote his name on the line, and he wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or finally doing something right. He took a photo of the signed pages and texted it to Vanessa's number. Her response came back in less than a minute. Good. Start Monday. I'll have Claire send you the property list and schedule. That was it. No celebration, no acknowledgement that his entire life had just shifted. Just business. Daniel sat there for a long time, staring at his phone, before he started the truck and drove home, telling his boss was worse than he expected. You're quitting? I'm taking a contract. Better pay? Steady hours. His boss, a red-faced man named Gary who'd been running the electrical company for 20 years, stared at him like he'd grown a second head. With who? Laurent Properties. Gary's expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like pity. You're working for her? You know her? I know of her. Everyone does. She's a shark, Carter. Eats contractors for breakfast and spits them out when they're not useful anymore. She offered me a fair deal. She offered you a leash, and when she's done with you, you'll come crawling back here begging for your old job. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. I gave you 2 weeks' notice. That's more than fair. 2 weeks? Gary laughed, bitter and mean. You think I need 2 weeks to replace you? Get out. You're done today. Daniel didn't argue. He grabbed his toolbox from the van, turned in his company phone, and walked away from the only steady job he'd had in 5 years. On the drive home, he called his mother. I quit. There was a long pause. Why? I got something better. Better how? More money, real stability. Another pause. Are you sure about this, Danny? He wasn't. Not even a little. But he said, Yeah, Ma, I'm sure. She coughed, long and wet, and Daniel's chest ached. Okay, baby, I trust you. He hung up and tried to believe she was right to. Monday morning, Danielle showed up at the first property on Vanessa's list, a high-rise apartment building downtown that smelled like old carpet and someone's burnt toast. The building manager, a tired-looking woman named Ruth, handed him a clipboard with a list of repairs that made his head spin. Half the units on the 6th floor have flickering lights. The basement circuit breaker keeps tripping, and someone on the 9th floor says their outlets are sparking. Bob was so proceeds. Daniel scanned the list. This is going to take more than a day. Ms. Laurent said you'd handle it. Yeah, but she also said if you need help, to let her know. But she seemed pretty confident you could do it yourself. Daniel looked at the list again and swallowed the frustration rising in his throat. All right, I'll get started. He spent the next 3 days at that building, crawling through walls and ceilings, replacing wiring that should have been condemned years ago. His back screamed, his hands cramped, but he finished every item on the list, and when he sent Vanessa the completion report, she responded immediately. Impressive. Next property tomorrow. No thank you. No acknowledgement of how much work it had been, just the next task. Daniel told himself that's what he'd signed up for. The second property was a boutique hotel in the Arts District. The third was an office complex with a temperamental HVAC system tied to faulty electrical panels. The fourth was a mansion in the hills, not Vanessa's, but someone else's. Someone who barely looked at Daniel when he showed up and treated him like furniture. By the end of the second week, Daniel had worked on 6 properties, logged 90 hours, and collapsed into bed every night too exhausted to think. Lily noticed. Daddy, you're always tired now. They were sitting at the kitchen table, her math homework spread between them. Daniel was supposed to be helping her with fractions, but his eyes kept drifting shut. I'm okay, baby. You didn't come to my art show. Daniel's stomach dropped. That was today? She nodded, not looking at him. Miss Parker hung up my painting. It was the ocean. Lily, I'm sorry, I forgot. You forget a lot now. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was commenting on the weather, and it broke something in Daniel that he didn't know how to fix. "I'll do better," he said. "I promise." She looked at him then, her eyes big and sad and far too understanding for a 7-year-old. "It's okay, Daddy. Grandma says you're working really hard." Daniel pulled her into his lap and held her tight, wishing he could explain that he was working hard for her, so she could have things he never did. But the words stuck in his throat. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat on the back porch with a beer and stared at the broken fence he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. His phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. "Are you free Thursday evening?" Daniel frowned. "Depends." "Why?" "I'd like to go over the progress in person. Dinner at 8. "Dinner? Is that a problem?" Daniel hesitated. Dinner felt different than a meeting in her office. Dinner felt personal. Where? She sent him an address, some restaurant downtown he'd never heard of, probably because people like him couldn't afford to eat there. "I'll be there," he typed. He regretted it before he even hit send. Thursday came too fast. Daniel dropped Lily off at his mother's house, ignoring the knowing look his mother gave him when he said he had a work meeting. "At 8 o'clock at night?" "It's with the client." "Uh-huh. It's not like that, Ma." She smiled, soft and tired. "Whatever you say, baby." Daniel drove downtown in the same button-down shirt he'd worn to Vanessa's office, wishing he owned something that didn't make him look like he was trying too hard. He parked 3 blocks away because the valet at the restaurant looked like he made more money than Daniel did, and walked in feeling like an imposter. The hostess looked him over with thinly veiled judgment. "Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting someone, Vanessa Laurent." Her expression shifted immediately. "Of course, right this way. Mathieu." She led him through the restaurant, all low lighting and quiet conversations and wine glasses that probably cost more than his truck payment, to a corner table where Vanessa was already sitting. She looked different. Softer, maybe. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves over her shoulders, and she was wearing a deep blue dress that made her look less like a CEO and more like a person. "Daniel, you made it." "Yeah, sorry if I'm late." "You're not. Sit." He sat, feeling awkward and out of place, and tried not to stare at the menu when the waiter handed it to him. There were no prices listed. That was never a good sign. "Order whatever you want," Vanessa said, like she could read his mind. "I'm not really hungry." "You've been working 12-hour days for 2 weeks. You're hungry." She wasn't wrong. Daniel ordered something he couldn't pronounce, and Vanessa ordered a steak that came with a wine pairing. The waiter disappeared, leaving them alone in the kind of silence that felt heavy. "So," Daniel said, because someone had to. "You wanted to talk about the progress?" Vanessa smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. "I lied. The work is fine. Better than fine, actually. You've done more in 2 weeks than my last contractor did in 6 months. Then why am I here?" She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Because I wanted to see if you were real." "Real?" "Everyone I meet wants something from me. Money, connections, access. You're the first person in a long time who doesn't." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The food came, and they ate in a silence that was less uncomfortable than it should have been. Vanessa asked him questions about Lily, about his mother, about how he'd ended up as an electrician, and Daniel found himself answering honestly, even when the answers made him feel exposed. "I didn't plan it," he said. "I was supposed to go to college, had a partial scholarship and everything. But then my girlfriend got pregnant and my dad left, and someone had to take care of everyone." "Where's Lily's mother now?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Gone. She left when Lily was 6 months old, said she couldn't do it." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. We're better off." Vanessa didn't argue, but her expression said she didn't quite believe him. "What about you, Goa?" Daniel asked. "How does someone end up running a real estate empire at 30? Carefully. She took a sip of her wine. "My father built the company. I inherited it when he died. Everyone expected me to fail." "Did you?" "Almost. The board tried to push me out, said I was too young, too inexperienced. So I worked harder than anyone else, made smarter deals, proved them wrong." "Sounds lonely." Vanessa's eyes met his, and for a second Daniel saw something raw and unguarded. "It is. They stayed at the restaurant until it closed, talking about nothing and everything. When the check came, Vanessa grabbed it before Daniel could even reach for his wallet. "I invited you," she said. "It's on me." Outside, the street was quiet, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. Daniel walked Vanessa to her car, a sleek black sedan that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and they stood there in the glow of the streetlights, neither of them moving to leave. "Thank you for tonight," Vanessa said. "For what?" "For being honest, for not pretending to be someone you're not." Daniel shrugged. "I don't know how to be anyone else." She smiled, small and sad. "That's why I like you." She got in her car and drove away, and Daniel stood there on the sidewalk, watching her taillights disappear, wondering what the hell had just happened. Over the next few weeks, the dinners became a routine. Every Thursday, Vanessa would text him an address, and Daniel would show up, still feeling out of place but less uncomfortable than before. They talked about work, about life, about the things they didn't say to anyone else. Vanessa told him about the pressure of running a company, about board meetings that felt like battles, about going home to an empty mansion and wondering if any of it was worth it. Daniel told her about Lily's soccer games and his mother's worsening cough, about the fear that he was failing everyone who depended on him. And somewhere between the second dinner and the fifth, something shifted. It was small at first, a look that lasted too long, a laugh that felt too easy. The way Vanessa leaned closer when he talked, like she didn't want to miss a word. Daniel tried to ignore it, tried to tell himself it didn't mean anything, but then came the night at the sixth property. It was a penthouse apartment in one of Vanessa's newest buildings, and the tenant, a tech executive who just moved in, was complaining about the lighting. Daniel spent the afternoon rewiring the fixtures, and when he finished, Vanessa showed up unannounced. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, which they both knew was a lie. She walked through the apartment inspecting his work, and Daniel followed her, hyper-aware of how close they were in the small space. "It's good," she said finally. "Really good." "Thanks." She turned to face him, and they were standing too close, close enough that Daniel could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Daniel thought about it, about the contract, about the dinners, about standing in a penthouse apartment he could never afford, talking to a woman who existed in a world he didn't belong in. "Yeah," he said. "Lately, I do." Vanessa's eyes searched his face, and for a moment Daniel thought she was going to say something important, something that would change everything. But then her phone rang, shattering the moment. She glanced at the screen and sighed. "I have to take this." She walked to the other side of the room, her voice dropping into the clipped, professional tone she used for business. Daniel stood there, heart pounding, and wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing. When she hung up, she looked tired. "I have to go. Emergency at the office." "Everything okay?" "It will be." She hesitated. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything." "I'm just doing my job." "No, you're doing more than that." She left before he could ask what she meant. That night, Daniel lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to convince himself he wasn't falling for her. It didn't work. The next Thursday, Vanessa didn't text. Daniel told himself it didn't matter, that he didn't care, but he checked his phone every 10 minutes anyway. Friday came and went, then Saturday. On Sunday, he finally broke and texted her. "Everything okay?" She responded an hour later. "Busy week, sorry." "No problem. Let me know if you need anything." She didn't respond. Daniel spent the next few days trying to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to the penthouse, to the way Vanessa had looked at him, to the questions she'd asked that felt like it meant something. Then, on Wednesday, she showed up at the property he was working on, a duplex in the suburbs that needed a full panel replacement. She was dressed down, in jeans and a sweater, and she looked exhausted. "Hey," Daniel said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to get out of the office." She looked around at the half-finished work. "Can I help?" Daniel laughed. "You want to help me rewire a breaker box?" "Why not?" "Because you're wearing a sweater that probably costs more than my mortgage. So I'll be careful." She said it with a stubborn set to her jaw that told Daniel she wasn't going to take no for an answer. "All right," he said, handing her a flashlight. Hold this. Whoa, stars, dear skis. They worked together in silence, Vanessa following his instructions, handing him tools when he asked, asking questions about what he was doing. And for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt like he could breathe. Why'd you really come here, Shin? He asked. Vanessa didn't answer right away. She was crouched next to him, holding the flashlight steady, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. Because I'm tired of being alone. Daniel stopped what he was doing and looked at her. You're not alone. I am. I have 1,000 employees and a dozen board members and more money than I know what to do with. And I'm the loneliest person I know. Then why do it? Because it's all I have. Daniel wanted to tell her that wasn't true, that she could have more if she wanted it, but the words felt too big, too dangerous, so he just nodded and went back to work. They finished the panel replacement as the sun was setting, and Vanessa helped him clean up, laughing when she got dust on her expensive jeans. Thanks for letting me stay, she said. Anytime. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Daniel felt the world narrow to just the two of them standing in the fading light. Daniel, Her phone rang. Again. She closed her eyes, frustration flickering across her face, and answered it. What? No, I told you to handle that. I don't care what the board says, it's my decision. She walked outside, her voice rising, and Daniel stood there, listening to her fight a battle he didn't understand. When she came back in, she looked defeated. I have to go. Okay. She started to leave, then stopped. Are you free Saturday? Depends. I'm hosting a charity gala. It's a nightmare and I hate these things, but I have to be there. Would you come? Daniel blinked. Me? Yes, you. I don't think I'm really the gala type. Neither am I, but I'd rather suffer through it with someone I actually like. Daniel thought about his closet, about the fact that he didn't own a suit, about how out of place he'd be in a room full of people who probably paid more for their shoes than he did for his truck. Okay, he said anyway. Vanessa smiled, and it was worth every uncomfortable moment he knew was coming. Thank you. She left, and Daniel stood there in the empty duplex, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. Saturday arrived like a storm Daniel wasn't ready for. He borrowed a suit from his neighbor, a guy who used to work in sales before he got laid off, and it fit poorly, tight in the shoulders and loose everywhere else. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to tie a tie he hadn't worn since his high school graduation, and swore under his breath when it came out crooked for the third time. Lily knocked on the door. Daddy, why are you so dressed up? I have to go to a work thing. You look funny. Thanks, kid. She giggled, and Daniel kissed the top of her head before heading out, his stomach twisting with nerves. The gala was at some historic hotel downtown, the kind with marble columns and chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a palace. Daniel walked in and immediately wanted to turn around and leave. Everyone was dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine, and he felt like a kid playing dress-up in his dad's clothes. He found Vanessa near the bar, surrounded by a group of men in expensive suits. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes, and when she saw Daniel, her expression shifted into something real. Excuse me, gentlemen, she said, and walked over to him. You came. I said I would. She looked him over and he braced himself for judgment. Instead, she smiled. You clean up nice. I look ridiculous. You look like you. That's better, yep. She hooked her arm through his, and they walked into the ballroom together, and Daniel tried not to think about the way people were staring. The ballroom was suffocating. That was Daniel's first thought as Vanessa guided him through the crowd of people who all seemed to know each other, who all moved with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to worry about anything that mattered. The conversations around him were about summer homes in the Hamptons and art auctions and investments Daniel couldn't even pretend to understand. Vanessa kept her hand on his arm, steering him toward a quieter corner near the windows that overlooked the city. She grabbed 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter and handed one to Daniel. I hate these things, she said quietly. Then why do them? Because if I don't show up, people talk. If I do show up, people talk. At least this way I control the narrative. Daniel took a sip of champagne. It tasted expensive and wrong, like everything else about the night. A man approached them, tall and silver-haired with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Vanessa, you look stunning as always. Richard, Vanessa's voice went flat, professional. I didn't think you'd come. And miss the opportunity to support such a worthy cause? Never. His eyes slid to Daniel, assessing. And who's this? Daniel Carter. He works for me. The dismissal in her words stung, even though Daniel knew she was probably trying to protect him from whatever this was. Richard's smile sharpened. A contractor? How? Refreshing. Vanessa usually brings someone from the club. I got bored of the club, Vanessa said coolly. I can see that. Richard's gaze lingered on Daniel's ill-fitting suit, and Daniel felt his face heat. Well, enjoy the evening. We should catch up later, Vanessa. There are some board matters we need to discuss. I'm sure there are. Richard walked away, and Vanessa let out a breath she'd been holding. Who was that? Daniel asked. Richard Castellano. He's on my board. Also my biggest pain in the ass. He seems like a real piece of work. That's putting it mildly. She drained her champagne and set the glass on a nearby table. Come on, let's get out of here. We just got here. I made an appearance. That's all anyone cares about. She led him through a side door and down a hallway that was blessedly empty. They ended up on a balcony that overlooked the hotel gardens, the sounds of the gala muffled behind them. Vanessa kicked off her heels and leaned against the railing, looking more relaxed than Daniel had seen her all night. Better? He asked. Much. She glanced at him. Sorry about Richard. He's protective of the company. Doesn't think I should be running it. Why not? Because I'm young. Because I'm a woman. Because I didn't earn it the way he thinks I should have. She laughed, but it was bitter. Take your pick. Daniel leaned against the railing next to her. For what it's worth, I think you're doing a pretty damn good job. You have to say that. I'm paying you. I don't have to say anything. But it's true. Vanessa looked at him, and in the dim light of the balcony, she looked younger somehow, softer. You really believe that? Yeah, I do. She held his gaze for a long moment, and Daniel felt that pull again, the one he'd been trying to ignore for weeks. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Daniel, I need to tell you something. Before she could continue, the balcony door opened and a woman stepped out, older, elegant, with sharp eyes that took in the scene immediately. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. The woman's gaze moved from Vanessa to Daniel and back again. Am I interrupting? Why, got you? No, Mother. Vanessa's whole demeanor changed, her spine straightening, her expression shuddering. We were just getting some air. So this was Vanessa's mother. Daniel could see the resemblance in the bone structure, the way they both held themselves like they were ready for a fight. And who is this? Daniel Carter. He's working on some of my properties. Her mother's eyebrow arched. I see. Well, Vanessa, there are several very important people inside who want to speak with you. You can't hide out here all night. I'm not hiding. Of course not. Her mother's smile was thin. 5 minutes. Then I expect you back inside. She left and Vanessa closed her eyes. I should go, Daniel said. No, stay. Please. Your mother doesn't seem like the kind of person who takes no for an answer. Miss Jamason, she's not, but neither am I. Vanessa turned to face him fully. What I was trying to say before she interrupted, Vanessa, you don't owe me an explanation. I get it. This is your world. I don't know what I am. You're the only real thing in my life right now. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process what she was telling him. I should go back inside, Vanessa said quietly. But I don't want to. Then don't. It's not that simple. Why not? She laughed, sad and tired. Because nothing in my life is simple. Because every decision I make affects hundreds of people. Because if I mess this up, I lose everything I've worked for. And what about what you want? Vanessa looked at him like he'd asked her to solve an impossible equation. I don't know if I'm allowed to want things anymore. Daniel wanted to tell her that was the saddest thing he'd ever heard. Instead, he said, everyone's allowed to want things. Even contractors in borrowed suits? Especially them. She smiled, and for a second the weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. But then the balcony door opened again, and a young woman in a staff uniform looked apologetic. Miss Laurent, they're ready for your speech. Vanessa's expression shifted back into the mask she wore for the world. I'll be right there. The woman disappeared, and Vanessa slipped her shoes back on. I have to go do my duty. Will you stay? I don't think, please, just until I'm done. Then we can leave together. Daniel nodded, even though every instinct told him he should get out now, before things got more complicated than they already were. They went back inside, and Vanessa was immediately absorbed by a group of people who wanted her attention, wanted her time, wanted pieces of her she probably didn't have left to give. Daniel found a spot near the back of the room and watched as she climbed the small stage and took the microphone. Her speech was polished, perfect, exactly what everyone expected. She talked about the charity the gala supported, about community investment and corporate responsibility, and all the things people who had too much money said to feel better about having it. But Daniel could see the exhaustion in her eyes, could see how much it cost her to stand up there and perform. When she finished, the room applauded, and Vanessa smiled and thanked them and played her part beautifully. Daniel was making his way toward the exit when someone blocked his path. Richard Castellanos stood there with another man, younger, wearing a smile that made Daniel's skin crawl. Leaving so soon? Richard asked. Yeah, long day. I'm sure it was. Richard's tone was pleasant, but there was something underneath it. Can I ask you something, Mr. Carter? What exactly is your relationship with Vanessa? I work for her. Just work? Daniel's jaw tightened. What are you implying? Nothing at all. I'm simply curious how a contractor ends up as her +1 to a $5,000 a plate charity gala. Maybe she wanted company that wasn't full of shit. Richard's smile vanished. Careful, you're out of your depth here. I'm aware. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a liability. Vanessa's judgment has been questionable lately. The board is concerned. About what? About her priorities. About whether she's focused on what's best for the company or on distractions. Richard's gaze was cold. I'd hate to see her career damaged because she made poor choices about who she associates with. Daniel felt anger rise in his chest, hot and tight. You threatening me? I'm giving you advice. Whatever you think is happening between you and Vanessa, it won't end well. For either of you. Before Daniel could respond, Vanessa appeared at his side, her hand slipping into his. Richard, is there a problem? Not at all. Mr. Carter and I were just having a chat. About? About how much we appreciate the work he's doing for the company. Richard's smile returned empty and sharp. Have a pleasant evening, Vanessa. We'll speak soon. He walked away, and Vanessa turned to Daniel. What did he say to you? Nothing important. Daniel, he thinks I'm a distraction, thinks the board is worried about your judgment. Vanessa's expression hardened. Richard doesn't speak for the board. Doesn't he? She didn't answer, and that told Daniel everything he needed to know. Come on, she said. Let's get out of here. They left through a side entrance, avoiding the crowd, and stood on the street while the valet brought Vanessa's car around. The city noise felt normal after the suffocating quiet of the gala, and Daniel breathed easier. I'm sorry, Vanessa said. About Richard, about all of it. It's fine. It's not fine. He had no right to talk to you like that. Maybe he's right. Vanessa looked at him sharply. About what? About me being out of my depth. About this being a bad idea. Is that what you think? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustrated and confused. I don't know what I think. I know I'm standing outside a hotel I can't afford, wearing a suit that doesn't fit after spending the night watching you be someone I don't recognize. That's not who I am. That's who I have to be. Is there a difference? The valet pulled up with Vanessa's car, and she stood there, keys in hand, looking like she was trying to decide something. Get in, she said finally. Vanessa, please, just get in. Daniel did, and Vanessa drove without telling him where they were going. They left downtown, headed toward the hills, and eventually pulled up to her mansion. The gates opened automatically, and she parked in front of the massive house that Daniel had only seen once before. Why are we here? He asked. Because I want to show you something. She led him inside, through the marble foyer and up the grand staircase, past rooms that looked like they'd never been lived in. They ended up in what looked like a private sitting room, smaller than the rest of the house, with comfortable furniture and bookshelves and windows that overlooked the city below. "This is my space," Vanessa said. "The only room in this entire house that's actually mine." Daniel looked around. It was nice, but it felt lonely, like a person trying to carve out a corner of warmth in a place that was too big and too cold. Vanessa poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a decanter on a side table and handed one to Daniel. They sat on the couch, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "My father built this house," Vanessa said finally. "He said it was supposed to represent success, power, everything we'd worked for. But he was never happy here, and neither was I." "Then why stay?" "Because leaving feels like admitting defeat, like admitting I can't handle the life I was given. That's not defeat, that's just being human." Vanessa took a sip of whiskey, her eyes distant. "When my father died, I thought taking over the company would make me feel close to him, like I could prove I was worthy of what he left behind. But all it's done is make me feel more alone." "You don't have to do this by yourself." "Don't I? Richard and the others are just waiting for me to fail. If I show any weakness, any sign that I can't handle it, they'll take everything. So what? Let them." Vanessa looked at him like he'd suggested she jump off a bridge. "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because it's all I have." "That's not true." "Isn't it? What else do I have, Daniel? No family that actually cares? No friends who aren't trying to use me for something? No life outside of board meetings and property deals and charity galas where I smile and pretend I'm not dying inside?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "I'll shout him." Her voice cracked on the... And Daniel saw the cracks in the armor she wore so well. "You have me," he said quietly. Vanessa's eyes met his, and the vulnerability there nearly broke him. "For how long? Until you realize how exhausting this is? Until you figure out I'm not worth the trouble? You think pretty low of me if you think I'd bail that easy. I think realistically. People leave, Daniel. They always do." "Not everyone. Everyone I've ever cared about." Daniel set his glass down and turned to face her fully. "I'm not everyone, and I'm not going anywhere." "You say that now. I mean it now." Vanessa looked at him for a long moment, and then, before Daniel could process what was happening, she kissed him. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was desperate, hungry. See, like she'd been holding back for too long and couldn't anymore. Daniel froze for half a second before he kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face, and everything else fell away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vanessa looked at him with wide eyes. "I shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" "Because it complicates everything. Everything's already complicated." She laughed, shaky and uncertain. "What are we doing, Daniel?" "I don't know, but I don't want to stop." Vanessa kissed him again, softer this time, and Daniel felt the world shift in a way that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. They spent the rest of the night on that couch, talking and not talking, kissing and holding each other like they were both trying to memorize the feeling. When the sun started to rise, Daniel knew he should leave, should go home to Lily and his mother and the life that felt a million miles away from this room. But Vanessa fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, and Daniel couldn't bring himself to move. He woke up a few hours later to his phone buzzing. His mother. "Danny, where are you? Lily's been asking for you." Daniel sat up carefully, trying not to wake Vanessa. I got held up. I'll be home soon." "Are you okay?" "Yeah, Ma, I'm fine." He hung up and looked at Vanessa, still sleeping, her face peaceful in a way he'd never seen when she was awake. He wanted to stay. Wanted to pretend that this could work, that they could figure out a way to bridge the gap between their worlds. But he knew better. He left a note on the coffee table. "Had to go. Talk later." And slipped out of the house as quietly as he could. The drive home felt like coming back to reality after a dream. Daniel stopped at a gas station to grab coffee and caught his reflection in the window. He still looked like himself, but something fundamental had changed. When he got home, Lily was eating cereal at the kitchen table, and his mother was doing a crossword puzzle, coughing between words. "There you are, his mother said. "Long work meeting." "Yeah." She gave him a look that said she knew he was lying, but she didn't push. Lily ran over and hugged him. "Can we go to the park today?" Daniel looked at his daughter, at her hopeful face, and felt the weight of every choice he'd made in the last 2 months. Yeah, baby. We can go to the park. They spent the afternoon at the playground, and Daniel pushed Lily on the swings and helped her across the monkey bars and tried to be present, but his mind kept drifting back to Vanessa, to the way she'd kissed him, to the fear in her eyes when she'd asked what they were doing. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat on the back porch and stared at his phone. He should text Vanessa, should say something about what happened, about what it meant. But before he could, she texted him, "We need to talk." Daniel's stomach dropped. Those 4 words never meant anything good. "Okay. When?" "Tomorrow. My office. Noon." "All right." He waited for her to say something else, but she didn't. Daniel barely slept that night. He kept replaying the evening in his head, trying to figure out what he'd done wrong, what had changed between the moment she kissed him and the moment he left. The next day, he dropped Lily at school and drove downtown, his hands gripping the wheel too tight. When he walked into Vanessa's office, she was standing by the window, her back to him, and she didn't turn around when he came in. "Close the door," she said. He did. "Last night was a mistake," she said, her voice flat, professional, all the warmth gone. "It shouldn't have happened." Daniel felt like he'd been punched. "A mistake!" "I wasn't thinking clearly. I was emotional, and I made a poor decision." "That's what you think it was? A poor decision?" Vanessa finally turned to face him, and her expression was cold, guarded. "What I think is that we both have too much to lose if this continues." "Vanessa." "Richard called me this morning. He's planning to bring our relationship to the board. He's going to use it to question my judgment, to push for a vote of no confidence." Daniel's chest tightened. "So that's it? He threatens you and you just fold?" "I'm not folding. I'm being realistic. If the board removes me, I lose the company. Everything my father built, everything I've worked for. And what about what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter." "That's bullshit." Vanessa's eyes flashed. "You don't understand what's at stake here. Then help me understand, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're choosing a company that makes you miserable over something that could actually make you happy. It's not that simple. It is that simple. You're just too scared to admit it." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You need to leave." "So that's it? You're just going to end this?" "There's nothing to end, Daniel. This was never going to work." The words hit harder than Daniel expected. He stood there, staring at her, at the woman who'd kissed him like she meant it, who'd fallen asleep in his arms, who was now looking at him like he was a problem to be solved. "Fine," he said. "But for the record, I think you're making the biggest mistake of your life." "I can live with that." Daniel walked out, and he didn't look back. The next week was hell. Daniel threw himself into work, taking on extra jobs, staying late, doing anything to keep his mind off Vanessa. But she was everywhere, in every property he worked on, in every payment that came through, in every moment his phone didn't ring. He didn't text her, didn't call. If this was what she wanted, he'd give it to her. Lily noticed something was wrong. "Daddy, are you sad?" They were sitting at the dinner table, Daniel pushing food around his plate without eating. "No, baby, just tired." "You're always tired now, and sad." Daniel looked at his daughter and felt the guilt twist in his chest. "I'm okay, I promise." But he wasn't okay, and he didn't know how to fix it. 2 weeks after the gala, Daniel was finishing up a job at one of Vanessa's office buildings when Claire, her assistant, found him. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Laurent needs to see you. It's urgent." Daniel's heart jumped. "Is she okay?" "She's in her office. Please, it's important." Daniel grabbed his tools and followed Claire to the car waiting outside. They drove downtown in silence, and when they arrived at Vanessa's building, Claire led him straight to the elevator. 32nd floor, she said, and then she was gone. Daniel rode up alone, his mind racing. When the doors opened, he walked to Vanessa's office and found the door open. She was sitting at her desk, and she looked terrible. Her hair was pulled back messily, her eyes were red, and there were papers scattered everywhere. "Vanessa, what's going on?" She looked up, and the relief on her face was almost painful to see. "You came. Claire said it was urgent." "It is." She stood up, pacing. Richard called an emergency board meeting. He's pushing for a vote to remove me as CEO. When? Tomorrow. Daniel felt his anger spike. He can't do that. He can. He has half the board on his side. He's using our connection as evidence that I'm not fit to lead. That's insane. It's effective. She stopped pacing and looked at him. I tried to fight it, tried to handle it on my own, but I can't. I need your help. What can I do? I need you to be there at the meeting. I need you to tell them the truth. Daniel stared at her. The truth? That there's nothing inappropriate between us. That you're just a contractor doing his job. The words felt like a slap. Is that what you want me to say? It's what I need you to say. Even though it's a lie? Vanessa's expression cracked. Please, Daniel, I'm begging you. If I lose this company, I lose everything. Daniel looked at her, at the desperation in her eyes, and felt something break inside him. You already lost everything, he said quietly. You just haven't figured it out yet. He turned to leave, and Vanessa called after him. Daniel, wait! But he was already gone. Daniel drove home with his knuckles white on the steering wheel and his chest so tight he could barely breathe. The city blurred past him, all lights and noise, and people who had no idea that his entire world had just collapsed in on itself. He kept replaying Vanessa's words in his head, the way she'd looked at him like he was a tool she could use and discard when it was convenient. When he pulled into his driveway, he sat there for 10 minutes, staring at nothing, trying to figure out how he'd let himself get here. Trying to understand how someone who'd made him feel seen for the first time in years could turn around and ask him to pretend none of it mattered. His mother was waiting in the kitchen when he finally went inside. She took one look at his face and set down her tea. What happened? Nothing. Danny. I don't want to talk about it. She studied him with that look mothers have, the one that sees through every lie and excuse. Does this have to do with that woman you've been working for? Daniel's jaw tightened. I said I don't want to talk about it. So it does. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and twisted the cap off too hard. She wants me to lie for her. Go in front of her board and tell them there's nothing between us so they don't fire her. His mother's expression shifted from concern to something harder. Is there something between you? I thought there was. Daniel took a long drink. Guess I was wrong. And what are you going to do? What can I do? She made her choice. I'm just the idiot who thought I mattered. His mother stood up, walked over, and put her hand on his shoulder. You're not an idiot. You're human. And humans make mistakes when they care about people. Yeah, well, this mistake might cost me the only stable income I've had in years. Then find something else. You always do. Daniel looked at his mother, at the way she was trying to stay strong, even though he could hear the rattle in her lungs, even though she was getting thinner every day and refusing to admit she needed to see a doctor. I'm tired, Ma. I know, baby, but you don't quit. That's not who you are. He wanted to believe her, wanted to be the person she thought he was. But right now, he just felt empty. That night, Daniel lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in 7 years, he let himself think about what his life would look like if he just walked away from all of it. The contracts, the impossible hours, the constant scramble to stay ahead of the bills. What if he just said no to all of it and tried to build something different? But then he thought about Lily sleeping down the hall, about his mother coughing in the next room, about all the people who depended on him, and he knew walking away wasn't an option. It never had been. The next morning, Daniel woke up to 17 missed calls and twice as many texts. Most were from numbers he didn't recognize, but 3 were from Claire. Mr. Carter, please call me. Ms. Laurent is asking for you. The meeting is at 2 p.m. Please respond. Daniel deleted them all. He got Lily ready for school, made her breakfast, braided her hair the way she liked, even though it took him 3 tries to get it right. She chattered about a field trip coming up, about how Emma had brought her dog to show and tell, about 100 small things that should have made him smile, but just made him feel more hollow. Daddy, are you listening? Daniel blinked. Yeah, baby. Sorry. What were you saying? I asked if you can come to the field trip. It's next Thursday. We're going to the Science Museum. I'll try. Her face fell. That means no. It means I'll try. She nodded, but she didn't believe him. Daniel could see it in her eyes, the way she'd learned to expect disappointment and manage it before it could hurt too much. After he dropped her off, Daniel drove to the duplex he'd been working on and threw himself into work. He ripped out old wiring with more force than necessary, his hands moving on autopilot while his mind churned through everything he wanted to say to Vanessa and knew he never would. Around noon, his phone rang. Unknown number. He ignored it. It rang again. Same number. And again. Finally, he answered. What? Mr. Carter, this is Claire. Ms. Laurent really needs... Tell Ms. Laurent I'm busy. The meeting starts in 2 hours. She's asking if you'll reconsider. The answer's no. Mr. Carter, please, she's... Daniel hung up. He went back to work, but his hands were shaking, and after he nearly shocked himself on a live wire, he sat down on the floor and put his head in his hands. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. This is Richard Castellano. We should talk. Daniel stared at the message, his anger flaring white hot. He typed back. About what? About what's best for everyone involved. Meet me at the Greystone Cafe. 1 o'clock. Daniel knew it was a terrible idea. Knew nothing good could come from meeting with the man who was trying to destroy Vanessa. But some part of him wanted to hear what Richard had to say, wanted to understand what kind of person looked at someone fighting to keep what was theirs and saw only an opportunity. He showed up at the cafe at 1:15, just late enough to make a point. Richard was sitting at a corner table, looking like he belonged there, like he belonged everywhere. Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. Daniel sat down without ordering anything. You've got 5 minutes. Direct. I respect that. Richard folded his hands on the table. I'll be equally direct. Vanessa is going to lose today's vote. The board has already decided. Then why are we here? Because I want to make sure the transition is smooth, and I want to make sure you understand that this isn't personal. Daniel laughed, cold and bitter. You're trying to ruin her career and you're telling me it's not personal? I'm trying to save a company from someone who's too distracted to run it properly. Vanessa is brilliant, but she's young, emotional, and making decisions based on feelings rather than logic. That's dangerous. You mean she's making decisions you don't agree with? She's making decisions that could cost shareholders millions, that could cost employees their jobs. Richard leaned forward. You care about her. I can see that. So let me ask you something. Do you really think you're good for her? What's that supposed to mean? It means you're a distraction she can't afford. It means every minute she spends thinking about you is a minute she's not focused on the company. And right now, the company needs her full attention. So your solution is to fire her? My solution is to put someone in charge who can actually do the job without their personal life getting in the way. Daniel felt his hands curl into fists under the table. You don't know anything about her. I know she inherited an empire she wasn't ready for. I know she's been struggling to keep it together for 3 years. And I know you're the latest in a long line of poor decisions that prove she's not capable of leading. You're wrong. Am I? Richard pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a photo of Daniel and Vanessa on the balcony at the gala, standing too close, her hand on his arm. This was taken 2 weeks ago. Since then, she's missed 3 board meetings, delayed 2 major acquisitions, and spent more time at job sites than in her office. That's not leadership. That's someone who's lost focus. Daniel pushed the phone back. You're a real piece of work, you know that? I'm a realist, and the reality is that Vanessa's time as CEO is over. The only question is whether she goes quietly or whether we have to drag this out and make it ugly. And where do I fit into this, Sam? You don't. That's my point. Richard stood up, buttoning his jacket. Walk away, Mr. Carter. Find another contract, another client, another life. Because if you show up to that meeting today, I will make sure everyone in that room knows exactly what's been going on between you two. And I will make sure Vanessa's reputation is destroyed so thoroughly that she'll never work in this industry again. Daniel stood too, his chair scraping loud against the floor. You threatening me again? I'm giving you a choice. Disappear, and this ends cleanly. Show up, and I burn everything down, including you. Richard walked out, leaving Daniel standing there with a rage so hot he thought it might consume him. He sat back down, ordered a coffee he didn't want, tried to think. The smart move was to walk away, to let Vanessa handle her own problems, to protect himself and Lily, and the fragile stability he'd managed to build. Richard was right about one thing. Daniel was out of his depth. He didn't belong in boardrooms or battles over corporate empires. He was just a guy with a toolbox who'd made the mistake of falling for someone he had no business falling for. But then he thought about the way Vanessa had looked at him that night on her couch, the vulnerability in her voice when she'd said he was the only real thing in her life. He thought about how hard she'd worked to prove herself, to earn something she'd inherited, to be more than just her father's daughter. And he thought about what kind of man he'd be if he let people like Richard Castellano win just because it was easier. Daniel finished his coffee, dropped a 10 on the table, and walked out. He had a board meeting to crash. The Laurent Properties building was buzzing with activity when Daniel arrived at 1:45. He was wearing his work clothes, jeans, boots, a shirt that had seen better days, and he got more than a few strange looks as he walked through the lobby to the elevators. Security stopped him at the 32nd floor. "I'm here for the board meeting." The guard looked him up and down. "You're not on the list." "I don't need to be on the list. I'm a witness." "A witness to what?" "Ask Richard Castellano. He'll know." The guard made a call, spoke in low tones, and then hung up, looking confused. "You can go in. Conference room at the end of the hall." Daniel walked down the corridor, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The conference room door was closed, but he could hear voices inside, raised, argumentative, the kind of tension that came right before something broke. He knocked once and opened the door without waiting for an answer. The room went silent. Vanessa was standing at the head of the table, her face pale, her hands gripping a stack of papers, like they were the only thing keeping her upright. Around the table sat a dozen people in expensive suits, all of them staring at Daniel like he'd just walked in naked. Richard Castellano sat at the far end, and when he saw Daniel, his expression went cold. "Who the hell are you?" an older woman asked. "Daniel Carter. I work for Miss Laurent." "This is a closed meeting," Richard said, his voice sharp. "You have no business being here." "Actually, I do, since I'm apparently the reason you're all trying to fire her." The room erupted. People talking over each other, demanding explanations, looking between Daniel and Vanessa like they were trying to piece together a scandal. Vanessa's eyes were wide and she was shaking her head slightly, mouthing no at him. But Daniel was done listening to what he was supposed to do. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said again, louder this time. "I'm an electrician, single father. I've been working on Ms. Laurent's properties for the last 2 months. And yeah, we've gotten close. But not in the way you're all thinking." "Mr. Carter," Richard said, standing, "you're out of line." "No, you're out of line. You called me this morning and tried to threaten me into staying away. You told me if I showed up here, you'd destroy her reputation. Well, here I am. Do your worst." The older woman, someone important, based on the way everyone deferred to her, leaned forward. "Mr. Castellano, is this true?" Richard's jaw tightened. "I had a conversation with Mr. Carter, yes, to clarify the situation. By threatening him? I was protecting the company's interests. By blackmailing a contractor." The woman's voice was ice. "That's your definition of protecting our interests?" "I was trying to prevent exactly this kind of circus." "You created the circus," Daniel shot back. "You took something that was none of your business and turned it into a weapon because you want her job." "That's absurd." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you've been looking for any excuse to push her out since the day she took over. And when you couldn't find a real reason, you decided to make one up." Richard's face was red now. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know she's worked harder than anyone in this room. I know she cares about this company more than you ever will. And I know the only reason you're trying to fire her is because you're terrified she's better at this than you'll ever be." The room was silent. Vanessa was staring at Daniel like she couldn't believe he was real. The older woman spoke again. "Miss Laurent, do you have anything to say?" Vanessa looked around the table, at all the faces waiting for her to defend herself, to explain, to prove she deserved to be there. And then she looked at Daniel. Something shifted in her expression. The fear melted away, replaced by something harder, stronger. Yes, she said. I have a lot to say. She set down the papers and stood up straighter. Richard is right about one thing. I've been distracted. I've missed meetings. I've been spending time on things that aren't directly related to this company, but not for the reasons he's implying. Then enlighten us, Richard said. I've been distracted because for the first time in 3 years, I remembered what it feels like to be human. To have someone in my life who doesn't want anything from me except honesty. To feel like I'm more than just a name on a door or a signature on a contract. That's very touching, Richard said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. But this isn't a therapy session. This is a business. You're right. It is the business. And I've spent 3 years sacrificing everything to prove I can run it. I've given up relationships, friendships, any semblance of a personal life. I've worked 80-hour weeks, closed deals you said were impossible, and increased our revenue by 32%. And it's still not enough for you, is it? It's not about effort. It's about judgment. Iski. My judgment has been fine. What you don't like is that I won't do things your way, that I won't let you run this company through me like a puppet. The older woman cleared her throat. Miss Laurent, are you and Mr. Carter romantically involved? Vanessa looked at Daniel. He could see her weighing the options, calculating the cost of honesty. Yes, she said finally. We are. The room exploded again. Daniel heard fragments of conversation. Inappropriate, conflict of interest. What was she thinking? But he kept his eyes on Vanessa. She wasn't backing down. And I don't apologize for it, she continued. Daniel has nothing to do with this company beyond the work he does on my properties. He's never influenced a single business decision. He's never asked me for favors or special treatment. All he's done is remind me that I'm allowed to be a person, not just a CEO. That's a lovely sentiment, Richard said, but it doesn't change the fact that your personal life has interfered with your professional responsibilities. Show me one decision I've made in the last 2 months that was bad for this company. One deal I botched, one client I lost. You can't, because there aren't any. Richard leaned forward. You missed 3 board meetings. I rescheduled them, and I sent detailed reports on everything we would have discussed, which you would know if you'd bothered to read them. You delayed the Henderson acquisition because Henderson was trying to lowball us, and I negotiated a better price. We made an extra $4 million because I waited. Richard was scrambling now, flipping through papers. You've been spending company time at job sites instead of at inspecting properties I own and ensuring they're up to code, which is literally my responsibility as CEO. The older woman was watching this back and forth with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. Mr. Castellano, do you have any evidence of actual wrongdoing? Richard's mouth opened and closed. She's compromised. That's not evidence, that's an opinion. The woman looked around the table. Does anyone else have specific concerns about Ms. Laurent's performance? Silence. Then I move that we table this vote until actual evidence of wrongdoing is presented. All in favor? Half the hands went up, then more. Within seconds, it was clear the vote wasn't going to happen. Richard looked like he'd been punched. This is a mistake. What's a mistake is you wasting our time with personal vendettas disguised as corporate governance, the woman said. Meeting adjourned. People started filing out, some of them shooting looks at Vanessa, others at Daniel. Richard stormed out without a word, his face a mask of barely contained rage. Within minutes, the room was empty except for Daniel and Vanessa. She was still standing at the head of the table, her hands shaking, her eyes bright with tears she was trying not to let fall. You came, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, I told you not to. I know. You could have lost everything. I don't care what Richard could have done. Vanessa walked around the table and stopped in front of him. Why did you do it? Because you asked me once if I loved what I do, and I didn't have an answer, but I know what I love, Vanessa. And it's not fixing lights or running wire or any of the shit I do for money. Then what is it? Daniel reached out and took her hand. It's watching my daughter score goals at soccer games. It's sitting on my back porch and drinking cheap beer. It's having dinner with someone who makes me feel like I'm not just surviving anymore. Daniel, let me finish. I spent 7 years convincing myself that being alone was easier, that if I didn't let anyone in, I couldn't get hurt. And then you walked into my life and asked me a question nobody else bothered to ask. and everything changed. What? That gordet amis. Vanessa's tears were falling now, and she didn't try to stop them. I'm sorry for asking you to lie, for trying to push you away, for being too scared to fight for this. You weren't too scared. You just needed a reminder that you're worth fighting for. She kissed him then, right there in the conference room where she'd almost lost everything, and Daniel kissed her back like it was the only thing that mattered. When they finally pulled apart, Vanessa was smiling through her tears. What do we do now, she asked. Now? We figure it out together. Richard's not going to give up. Let him try. I'm not going anywhere. Vanessa laughed, shaky and relieved. You realize everyone in this building is going to know about us by tomorrow. Good. I'm tired of pretending. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the empty conference room, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt like he could breathe. His phone buzzed. His mother. Where are you? Lily's school called. She's sick. Daniel showed Vanessa the text. I have to go. I'll come with you. You don't have to. I want to. They left the building together, and if anyone noticed the CEO of Laurent Properties leaving in the middle of the day with the electrician in work boots, nobody said anything. They picked up Lily from school. She had a fever and a cough that sounded too much like her grandmother's, and took her home. Vanessa sat with her on the couch while Daniel made soup, and when he came back into the living room, Lily was telling Vanessa about her art project, and Vanessa was listening like it was the most important thing in the world. His mother watched from the kitchen doorway and caught Daniel's eye. She smiled, and Daniel knew what she was thinking. This one's different. That night, after Lily was asleep and his mother had gone to bed, Daniel and Vanessa sat on the back porch under the stars. She was wearing one of his old sweatshirts because she'd gotten cold, and she fit into his life in a way that should have felt strange but didn't. Thank you, she said, for today, for showing up when I needed you. Always. I mean it, Daniel. You didn't have to do that, and I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd walked away. I tried walking away. It didn't work. She leaned her head on his shoulder. What happens now? With us, I mean. I don't know, but I know I want to find out. It's going to be complicated. Everything worth having is. Well, Vanessa smiled. You really believe that? Yeah, I do. They sat there in the quiet, and Daniel thought about how far he'd come from the morning his alarm went off at 4:47, and he'd felt like he was drowning. He was still tired, still broke, still barely holding everything together. But for the first time in 7 years, he wasn't doing it alone. And that made all the difference. The weeks after the board meeting were harder than Daniel expected. Not because things got worse, but because things got real in a way that neither he nor Vanessa knew how to handle. The world didn't suddenly align itself to make their lives easier. If anything, it pushed back harder, testing whether what they had was strong enough to survive outside that conference room. Richard Castellano didn't go quietly. He leaked the story to a business blog that specialized in corporate gossip, and within 48 hours, Vanessa's relationship with Daniel was fodder for every industry website and social media platform that cared about billionaire drama. The headlines were predictable and cruel. CEO's blue-collar romance raises questions about judgment. Laurent heiress dating her electrician, love story or liability. From breaker boxes to boardrooms, the man behind Vanessa Laurent's controversial choices. Vanessa tried to ignore it, but Daniel could see it wearing on her. She'd check her phone and her jaw would tighten. She'd sit through meetings and come home exhausted from defending herself to people who'd already made up their minds. They're calling me reckless, she said one night, lying on Daniel's couch while Lily did homework at the kitchen table. Like falling for someone is the worst decision I could make. You care what they think? I care that it affects the company. 3 clients pulled their contracts this week, said they weren't comfortable working with someone who couldn't separate personal and professional. Daniel set down this beer he'd been drinking. You losing money because of me? I'm losing money because people are small-minded and judgmental. That's not on you. But it felt like it was. Daniel had spent his entire adult life trying not to be a burden, and now he was watching Vanessa's world crack because she'd chosen him. It didn't matter that she said it wasn't his fault. It didn't change the fact that her life would be easier if he wasn't in it. His mother noticed him pulling away before Vanessa did. "You're doing that thing again," she said one morning while he made coffee. "What thing?" "The thing where you decide you're not worth the trouble and start pushing people away before they can leave on their own." Daniel didn't answer. "Danny, look at me." His mother's voice was gentle but firm. "That woman loves you, and I don't say that lightly. I've watched her with Lily. I've watched her with you. She's not here because she's confused or bored or trying to rebel against her fancy life. She's here because she wants to be. People are destroying her reputation because of me. People are showing their true colors. There's a difference. Ma, listen to me. You've spent 7 years making yourself smaller so other people would be comfortable. You worked jobs you hated. You gave up dreams you had. You turned yourself into whatever everyone else needed you to be. And for what? So you could survive? That's not living, baby. That's just not dying." The words hit harder than Daniel wanted to admit. "I don't know how to be anything else." "Then learn. Because that little girl in there deserves a father who's happy. And Vanessa deserves a man who's not constantly waiting for her to realize she made a mistake." Daniel looked at his mother, at the woman who'd sacrificed just as much as he had, who'd never complained even when she should have. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been this wise. You just stopped listening somewhere along the way." Oh. That conversation stayed with Daniel for days. He started noticing the small ways he held himself back, the ways he made himself smaller in Vanessa's presence, how he'd defer to her opinion even when he disagreed, how he'd apologize for things that weren't his fault, how he'd convinced himself that being low maintenance was the same as being loved. Vanessa noticed the shift before he said anything. They were at her place. She'd insisted on cooking dinner, which had resulted in burnt chicken and smoke alarms, and both of them laughing so hard they couldn't breathe. When she turned to him and asked, "What's going on with you?" "What do you mean?" "You've been different lately, quieter." Daniel thought about lying, about brushing it off, but his mother's words echoed in his head. "I've been thinking about what it costs you to be with me." Vanessa set down her fork. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Turn this into some noble sacrifice, where you walk away to protect me. That's not what I want." "What do you want?" "I want you to stop treating yourself like you're not good enough. I want you to stop apologizing for existing. I want you to believe me when I say I chose this." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Daniel, I've had everything money can buy, and none of it made me happy. You make me happy. Lily makes me happy. Your mother's terrible coffee and your broken fence and the way you fix things with your hands, all of it makes me happy. Your clients are leaving. Some of them. And you know what? They can go. I don't want to work with people who think my personal life is their business." That's easy to say now. But what happens when more leave? What happens when this board comes after you again? "Then I fight, like I've been fighting my whole life." Vanessa's voice was steady, certain. "I'm not giving you up because some people can't handle the fact that I fell in love with someone who doesn't fit their idea of appropriate." Daniel's breath caught. "You love me?" "Of course I love you. Did you think I'd go through all this for anything less?" He wanted to say it back. The words were right there, pressing against his chest, but they stuck in his throat, tangled up with every fear he'd carried for 7 years. Vanessa saw it in his face. "You don't have to say it. Not until you're ready." But Daniel was tired of being afraid, tired of holding back the parts of himself that felt too big or too much or too inconvenient. "I love you," he said, and it came out rough and honest and real. "I've been in love with you since the night you fell asleep on my shoulder and looked more peaceful than I'd ever seen you." Vanessa smiled, and this time there were tears in her eyes. "Took you long enough." "Yeah, well, I'm a slow learner." She stood up, walked around the table, and kissed him. And Daniel let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he was allowed to have this. Things didn't magically get easier after that. Richard continued his campaign against Vanessa, spreading rumors and making calls to investors, trying to undermine her at every turn. Some of it worked. The company lost contracts and 2 board members resigned in protest of Vanessa's unprofessional conduct. But something had shifted in Vanessa. She stopped trying to appease people who were determined to see her fail. She fought back, worked harder, made smarter deals, and slowly started rebuilding what Richard had tried to destroy. Daniel started his own company. It terrified him, the idea of striking out on his own without the safety net of a steady paycheck. But Vanessa believed in him, and his mother believed in him. And somewhere along the way, he started believing in himself. He called it Carter Electric, printed business cards on his home computer, and took on small jobs that wouldn't conflict with his Laurent contracts. It was slow going, but it was his. Lily adjusted to having Vanessa around in the way kids do, with curiosity, then acceptance, then fierce protectiveness. She started calling Vanessa by her name instead of Daddy's friend, which felt like progress. She'd drag Vanessa to her soccer games and art shows and school plays, and Vanessa showed up to every single one, usually with her work phone silenced and her attention fully present. "She's good with her," Daniel's mother said one Saturday afternoon while they watched Vanessa and Lily play catch in the backyard. "Yeah, she is. You think about the future with her?" Daniel watched Vanessa laugh at something Lily said. Watched the way she moved in his space like she belonged there. "All the time." "Good. Because I like her. And I don't like many people." His mother's health got worse before it got better. The cough turned into pneumonia, and Daniel spent 3 terrifying days at the hospital while doctors ran tests and Lily asked questions he didn't know how to answer. Vanessa took time off work, actually took time off, not the half-present version where she was physically there but mentally somewhere else, and stayed with them. She sat with his mother, brought her books and magazines, made terrible small talk that somehow made his mother smile. "She's a keeper," his mother told Daniel when Vanessa stepped out to get coffee. "Don't screw it up." "I'm trying not to." "Try harder." When his mother was finally released, weak but stable, Daniel came home to find Vanessa had cleaned the entire house, done all the laundry, and somehow convinced Lily to finish her homework without complaint. She was standing in his kitchen, looking exhausted and beautiful, and Daniel realized he didn't want her to leave at the end of the night. "Move in with us," he said. Vanessa looked up from the pot she was stirring. "What?" "Move in. Not forever, not unless you want to. But stop going back to that huge empty house. Stay here." "Daniel, your place is barely big enough for the 3 of you." "We'll make it work. We always do." Vanessa set down the spoon and walked over to him. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She moved in 2 weeks later, bringing only what she needed and leaving the mansion mostly empty. She'd list it eventually, she said. Sell it to someone who wanted the status symbol more than the actual home. For now, she slept in Daniel's bed, ate breakfast at his tiny kitchen table, and learned how to navigate the chaos of a 7-year-old's schedule. It wasn't smooth. They fought about money. Daniel hated that Vanessa paid for things he couldn't afford, and Vanessa hated that he wouldn't let her help more. They fought about Lily. Daniel thought Vanessa was too lenient. Vanessa thought Daniel was too strict. They fought about work, about boundaries, about whose turn it was to do the dishes. But they also laughed. They stayed up late talking about nothing and everything. They figured out how to be partners instead of just 2 people trying not to mess up what they had. 6 months after Vanessa moved in, Richard Castellano resigned from the board. The official statement cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. He'd lost. Vanessa had outlasted him, outmaneuvered him, and proven that she could run the company on her own terms. 3 of the board members who'd sided with him followed him out, and Vanessa replaced them with people who actually cared about the work instead of the politics. The company stabilized. New clients came in to replace the ones who'd left. Revenue climbed, and Vanessa started delegating more, hiring people she trusted so she didn't have to carry everything herself. "I'm thinking about stepping back," she told Daniel one night. They were on the back porch, the one Daniel had finally fixed, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. "From the company?" "Shares, copa, monets." "Not completely, but I don't need to be CEO to have a life. I could be on the board, consult on major deals, and let someone else handle the day-to-day." "What would you do instead?" "I don't know. Spend more time with you and Lily. Maybe travel. Maybe figure out who I am when I'm not defined by a job title." Daniel took her hand. "You sure?" "Not even a little, but I think that's the point." She made the announcement 3 months later. The business world reacted with the predictable mix of shock and speculation, but Vanessa didn't care. She handed the CEO position to someone she trusted, stayed on as board chair, and started showing up to Lily's soccer games without her phone buzzing every 5 minutes. Daniel's company grew slowly but steadily. He hired 2 guys he'd worked with before, rented a small office space, and started bidding on jobs that had nothing to do with Vanessa. It felt good, building something that was entirely his. It felt even better when clients started recommending him to others, when his reputation was based on his work instead of who he was dating. Lily turned 8. They threw her a party in the backyard, and half her class showed up along with Daniel's mother and a handful of neighbors, and Vanessa's assistant Claire, who'd become something close to a friend. Lily blew out the candles on a cake Vanessa had tried to bake, and mostly succeeded at. And when someone asked what she'd wished for, Lily said, "I can't tell you or it won't come true." But later, when Daniel was putting her to bed, she whispered, "I wish that Vanessa would stay forever." Daniel's throat tightened. Yeah, is that okay? That's more than okay, baby. Do you think she will? I think she wants to. Lily smiled and closed her eyes, and Daniel sat there for a long time, watching his daughter sleep and thinking about how much had changed in a year. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Daniel found Vanessa sitting on the porch steps, looking up at the stars. You okay? He asked, sitting down next to her. I was just thinking about my dad, wondering what he'd think about all this. What do you think he'd think? Honestly, I think he'd be furious. He built that company to be a dynasty, and I'm walking away from it. You're not walking away, you're just making space for other things. I know, but it still feels like I'm disappointing him. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? Always. I spent 7 years trying not to disappoint anyone, trying to be what my daughter needed, what my mother needed, what my clients needed, and you know what I learned? You can't live your whole life for other people. At some point, you have to choose yourself. That sounds lonely. It's not. Not when you find people who love you for who you actually are, not for what you can do for them. Vanessa leaned her head on his shoulder. When did you get so wise? About the same time I met this billionaire who asked me if I loved what I did. She laughed, soft and warm. Best broken light I ever called about. They sat there in the quiet, and Daniel thought about the year behind them and the years ahead. There would be more fights, more challenges, more moments where they'd have to choose each other over the easier path. But that was the thing about love. It wasn't supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be worth it. A year and a half after Daniel first walked into Vanessa's mansion with a toolbox and a chip on his shoulder, she bought a house 3 blocks from his. It was smaller than the mansion, bigger than his rental, and perfect in a way that had nothing to do with square footage or property value. It had a yard for Lily to play in, a workshop where Daniel could store his tools, and a kitchen big enough for all of them to cook together without tripping over each other. They moved in on a Saturday with help from Daniel's crew and Vanessa's assistant and Daniel's mother, who supervised from a lawn chair and offered commentary no one had asked for. Lily claimed the bedroom with the window seat immediately, and Vanessa set up a home office that she promised she'd only use during actual work hours. That first night in the new house, they ordered pizza because none of them had the energy to cook. They ate on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and Lily fell asleep between them while they tried to decide which room to unpack first. We should probably get her to bed, Vanessa whispered. Probably. But neither of them moved. Daniel looked at his daughter, at the woman he loved, at the house they were going to fill with memories and arguments and ordinary moments that mattered more than any fortune. I never thought I'd have this, he said quietly. Have what? A family that chose to be here, a life that feels like mine. Vanessa took his hand. You deserve it. You've always deserved it. So do you, she smiled. Took me a while to believe that. How long? About 32 years and one electrician with terrible timing. Daniel laughed, careful not to wake Lily. You saying I have bad timing? The worst, but it worked out anyway. They carried Lily to bed together, tucked her in, and stood in the doorway of her new room watching her sleep. Then they went back downstairs and started unpacking boxes, working side by side in comfortable silence, building the life they'd both been too afraid to want. 2 years after that first conversation about loving what you do, Daniel stood in his backyard on a Sunday morning, cooking breakfast while Lily practiced cartwheels and Vanessa read the paper at the patio table. His mother had passed 6 months earlier, peacefully, in her sleep, the way she'd wanted, and the grief still hit him at unexpected moments. but it was softer now, mixed with gratitude for the time they'd had and the things she'd taught him about love and sacrifice and knowing when to choose yourself. Vanessa looked up from the paper. "What are you thinking about?" "My mom. How she told me I was just surviving, not living. Was she right?" "Yeah, she was." Daniel flipped a pancake. "But I'm not just surviving anymore." "No? No. I'm building something, with you, with Lily. Something that's mine." Vanessa set down the paper and walked over to him. "Ours. Ours," Daniel agreed. Lily ran over, breathless and grinning. "Did you see my cartwheel?" "I saw. It was perfect." Vanessa said she'd teach me how to do a handstand later. "Did she now?" Vanessa raised her hands in surrender. "I may have promised something I can't deliver." "We'll figure it out," Lily said confidently. "We always do." Daniel watched his daughter run back to practice more cartwheels, watched Vanessa smile at him with a warmth that had replaced the loneliness he'd seen that first day in the mansion, and realized something important. For 7 years, he'd thought his job was to fix things, to repair what was broken, to solve problems, to make everything work even when it shouldn't. And yeah, that's what he did for a living. But what he'd learned from Vanessa, from building this life together, was that sometimes the most important things can't be fixed because they were never broken to begin with. People aren't projects. Love isn't a problem to solve. And happiness isn't something you earn by sacrificing everything else. Sometimes happiness is just showing up. Being honest. Choosing someone and letting them choose you back, even when it's complicated and messy, and nothing like what you planned. Daniel had walked into Vanessa's life thinking he was there to repair a broken light. And in a way, he had. But what he hadn't known, what he couldn't have known, was that she'd walked into his life and repaired something too. Not fixed, because he'd never really been broken. Just reminded him that he was allowed to want more than survival. That he was worth more than the sum of his struggles. And now, standing in a backyard that was theirs, cooking breakfast for a family he'd chosen and been chosen by, Daniel understood what his mother had been trying to tell him all those years. This was living. This messy, imperfect, beautiful life where nothing was guaranteed except that they'd face it together. The pancakes were burning. Lily was demanding Vanessa try a cartwheel. The neighbors were probably going to complain about the noise. And Daniel had never been happier in his entire life.